Hi, Chris. It's Mom. Look, honey, I've got a lot of work to do, so I won't be home until late again. Just do the usual, you know, fix yourself a little something, anything you want. Oh, and I left some money for you on the counter. Use it for whatever you like. Now, Dad won't be home until Tuesday. He says hi. Oh, and somebody told me you quit soccer. Is anything wrong? Well, just leave me a note. Love you. Bye.
The basic reason that we have come to Europe is to observe the 50th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe, at the end of World War II. In fact, it was just a few days ago here in Vienna that they held a celebration marking Austria's liberation from the Nazis at the end of the Second World War. There was a concert of sorts with pop stars like Dionne Warwick and figures from the literary world like Salman Rushdie. And over the 2 weeks that we are here in Europe, we will be showing you how Europe has evolved since the end of World War II. But as we begin this morning, we want to show off our surroundings. And so we'll start with Joan.
Yes, because the Belvedere is really a showcase of Baroque architecture. It was built in the late 17th century by Prince Eugene of Savoy. And this fellow was a legendary military commander and also patron of the arts. And when we use the term the Belvedere, we mean the whole expanse. That takes in 2 palaces and all the gardens that connect them. And of course, no Baroque palace was complete without a garden that equaled it in grandeur. But this park even exceeds the opulent standards of the time. Now, the best way to appreciate this garden is to really think of it as art. And there's a lot of symbolism in the garden. And from my vantage point, I'm smack in the middle. You really get to see it well. Turn around, look behind me. Right down there, that's at the foot of the garden, and that is the lower palace. That's where Prince Eugene did his, day-to-day living. Now, the park is laid out in French style, very formal, very planned. And the backbone of every Baroque garden is a very, very wide path right up the middle. As we'll see in a minute, its purpose is to guide us directly to the main building on these grounds, which is the Upper Palace. But again, down here in this lower park, it's dominated by 4 hedge gardens, and they kind of resemble a maze. And remember I talked about symbolism? Well, I am told that these mazes that you see down here are actually, they kind of form little rooms to represent the outdoor version of the palace's interiors. And take a look, you'll see statues all around too. The statues represent the muses, and the muses are figures from ancient mythology. And everywhere you look around here, you find all kinds of symbols, and we'll see even more now as Charlie picks up the tour. Charlie?
All right, Joan, as you mentioned, this is all Baroque design. And if you know, Baroque design depends on Greek mythology, and that is at the heart, for instance, of these gardens. The gardens exist on 3 physical levels and 3 psychological levels as well. That bottom level with the mazes, that is sort of man in a state of confusion, lost in the maze. Then the second level there where Joan was is basically steps and walls leading up toward the top. And then I'm actually walking now along what they called sort of the path of enlightenment on the 3rd level of the garden. And this is the level, it's an ascension. It takes you right up to the main palace. You were sort of thought to be at that point ascending to the level of the gods. I mean, it's a little boastful for somebody to build a house and say that it is the spot for the gods, but nonetheless, that was the Baroque way. And as you may notice, there are fewer trees on this level. That's because you're supposed to be above the tree line, on your way to heaven in these gardens. And as we mentioned, there is an exquisite view from here. Even though you're smack in the center of Vienna, he had a nice little hillside to look over the old town. As they say in real estate, everything is location, and he certainly had it. Now, while we're in Europe each day, we want to take a moment just for a little picture book, as we're going to call it, to show you our surroundings. And so we start today with our picture book of Vienna.
As you may know, Austria was home to some of the world's greatest composers, Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Haydn, Strauss, and others. So it's understandable that Austrians take their music seriously. And where do Austrians go for a heavy dose of the classics? Our own Steve Fox has the answer.
To serious music lovers, Salzburg is Mecca, home to some of the world's most prestigious and expensive festivals. The social elite arrive from around the globe in their finery. The tickets are very costly. The classical music is renowned. Major recording companies spend serious money promoting established stars and up-and-coming new artists.
You really get the cream of the crop coming here as far as performers are concerned in all levels. People come from all over the world. They all come here and a larger public can be reached in a shorter amount of time. And that's also very fascinating for us, of course.
As it stands now, how much of this city's economy depends on tourism?
45 to 50%.
And how much of that tourism is driven by music, by the town's reputation?
80%.
The fact that this relatively small city of 250,000 people has become known around the world as a musical mecca of sorts would probably astonish the one truly famous musician and composer who was born and bred here, a man who hated Salzburg during his lifetime, who considered it a provincial small town, and who left it as soon as he could. We are talking here about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Born in this house in 1756, Mozart left his mark on the entire city of Salzburg. Tributes to him can be seen at every turn. For example, the Mozarteum has the largest collection of Mozart memorabilia in the world. Director Rudolf Angermüller says that Mozart is the reason music festivals are held in Salzburg today.
The first festival, the Sons of Mozart were here, was the beginning of the 19th century.
Why has Salzburg become so closely associated with great classical music?
No, because of Mozart. Mozart is the reason of culture here.
As I understand it, Mozart didn't think much of Salzburg. What would he have thought of what it has become today?
He would have written something which I think in his later years, the major tragic work about culture being sold out.
Maybe he would have signed a contract with Sony.
I think this would have been for the jingles, yes.
Whatever the reason for its success, there is no doubt that Salzburg is the place to be if you're seriously interested in the sound of music.
And I'm joined now by a group whose music might not immediately be associated with the festivals of Salzburg, but it is an important part of the legacy of Austria's music nonetheless. These are members of the Almer Alphornbläser. They play their alpine horns all over Europe and all over the world, and they will play for us right now.
There are few things more beautiful than the Viennese waltz, popularized in this city by Johann Strauss, and Willow Bay is here to show you the finer points of the waltz. Willow?
Charlie, I am joined by Thomas Ellmeyer. He's carrying on the great tradition of the waltz by teaching it to students at his Ellmeyer Dance School here in Vienna. Now, I know it was a craze in 1814, but is the waltz still popular today?
It's extremely popular today. Actually, all the pupils that come to our school, all the students are learning the waltz primarily, but also all types of other dances, of course.
So teenagers come in and willingly learn to waltz?
They are crazy to learn to waltz, that's right.
All right, well, I'm crazy to learn to waltz too, so do you think you can teach me?
Yes, no problem.
Okay.
It's very simple because you repeat the same steps time and again. It's always right foot forward, forward, side, close, back, side, close. Now all you have to do is to turn as well.
Side. Turn as well, okay.
And that is forward, side, close, back, side. Close.
Okay. Well, you know what? Now I think we should watch some of your students get to work. Thank you.
Vienna is a city renowned for great music, and just to give you an idea of how musical is this city, in the past 2 nights, Saturday and Sunday night, there were 17 major orchestral performances in this city of just 1.5 million people. Our science editor, Michael Gillen, is joining us this morning from the home of the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. It is a hall renowned for its acoustical excellence. Michael?
That's right, Charlie. Now let's see if I can pronounce this. This is called the Goldene Saal. It's called the Golden Hall here in Vienna. And you know, composers from Brahms to Bernstein have said, this is the place where you can fulfill all your musical wishes. You know, if this hall could speak, it would tell you that it was designed by an architect named Theophil Ritter von Hensen. It was built back in 1868, which is the golden age of concert halls. These walls cannot speak, of course, but they can sing. And whether I'm speaking or whether I'm performing, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, these walls literally vibrate. They resonate along with me and thereby enhance the sound. Now, it isn't easy to design one of these places because if the walls do not vibrate along with each musical note, then you end up with a concert hall that is acoustically dead. It turns out that the ideal concert hall is one where the walls vibrate with the musical note and then continue to resonate thereafter for about 2 seconds. And it turns out that this place, of all the places in the world, comes closest to meeting that 2-second ideal. Why? Well, that's where it becomes a bit of a scientific mystery. Scientists have tried to analyze this place the way they've tried to analyze, say, a Stradivarius violin. They've only had partial success. It probably has something to do with the fact that most of this place is made out of wood. The floor is made out of wood, the seats, even these marble panels back here are painted wood. It probably also has something to do with the fact that the space between the ceiling and the roof is uncommonly short, and that there is a hole beneath this floor that's rather wide and acts as a kind of a resonance cavity or a voice box, if you will. Whatever the reason, it all adds up to what most musicians say is the acoustically most perfect concert hall in the world.
You wouldn't know it by American standards, but this is a typical street in Graz. It's not just a little alleyway. There are all kinds of shops and restaurants all along these little winding, narrow paths. But that's not the only thing that is unfamiliar to Americans about Graz. Last week, back in the States, we went out and spoke to some Americans. It seems even the name Graz is a mystery.
Styria is a stereo that's attached to your steering wheel.
You know what Graz is?
No, I don't have a clue. What is Graz?
I have no idea.
Styria? I don't know. Isn't that like when you're like scared or like paranoid, like hyposteria or something?
A Graz would be a state of mind. Perhaps. You know, I'm just in a Grazi sort of feeling.
In Russia. Somewhere in the United Arab Emirates.
Graz. I think it's a city in Georgia.
California.
Poland. I've never heard that word before. Unless like Mardi Gras. Sounds like a party, I don't know.
Graz, Austria, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was there, I visited his birth house when I was in Graz.
You're the first person to figure it out. Very good.
Well, thank you.
Inside the armory, And this is something I think that you have never seen before. It's a branch of the Styrian Provincial Museum, and this armory contains original arms and armor made in the 14, 15, and 1600s. The armory itself dates to the 17th century.
What's so amazing, though, that it has all been left practically untouched. I mean, this stuff is the original stuff. All the armor, the swords, the guns, just like they were used back, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And Dr. Peter Kren is the curator of the museum.
No copies here. These are all originals.
Yes, these are originals.
Well, take us back. I mean, when this armory was actually working, how did it work? I mean, do you come in, is it issued to people? Do you buy it? Do you rent it?
Yes, of course. Now, the Styrian authorities had to have a central institution for storing arms and armors, and this was these Landeszeichhaus in Graz. So it was the most important institution for the defense of the country.
But why was it necessary to have so many arms here, as opposed to some other place in Austria?
Now, in case of war, these weapons have been distributed in the several districts of the country, and there the levy troops have been equipped with them.
So if I'm a nobleman and I have a small army and there are Ottomans advancing from the southeast, I would come here to get my arms.
Yes, you can come here.
And buy it or rent it?
Come here and buy or rent the weapons.
And this, we're looking at it right here. I mean, first of all, how much does this weigh?
Now, it weighs 66 pounds. It's very heavy.
If they fall down, can they get up?
They had to remove some parts of it, I think.
Can you move? Can he move a little bit for us and show us? He doesn't creak like the Tin Woodman.
I mean, it seems like it would be hard to ride on horseback.
Yes, of course. I think training, a good training, was very useful for warriors which were wearing this sort of armor. It was the heavy cavalry, you know.
This would be cavalry. This is not a foot soldier. This is cavalry.
It's, of course, cavalry.
Okay, and this
I mean, it's like a child.
Yeah, this is the light cavalry, and this is my stepson, Michael.
Well, no, but let me ask you a question, though. I mean, it's the right size for him. Does that mean that there were children fighting?
The average size of this time was a bit smaller than
the average size of the time was smaller.
Now, this is no small piece of
This is an infantry armor with a two-handed sword.
Two-handed?
Yeah, two-handed sword.
I mean, it's so big and heavy and long that it takes two hands? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and to cut the lances of the enemy off. So,
cut the what?
Cut away the lances of the enemy. You know, the
lances that they have.
Yes,
okay.
He would charge with this pointed forward? Would he walk with this pointed forward?
Yes, but only when he was mostly he was fighting in the first rank, in the first line.
That goes forward.
But when the two armies were touching, then this sort of sword was not very useful. So he had a smaller one on the
for close-hand combat. This would not work. What is this for?
Now, if there comes a stroke from the enemy, he can. Catch the throat, yes.
Catch the throat?
The throat.
Yeah.
Oh.
Thank you. I'm glad you told me that.
And there are guns here, too. I don't know. I guess I didn't know there were guns back that far.
The heavy cavalry, they had guns. They had pistols. That means two pistols. And the broadsword you can see here.
As guns came into fashion and began to be used, did that make armor obsolete? What brought took armor away?
No, it did not. But it caused more specializing of the troops. You know, in the medieval time we had the mounted knight. He was the hero, he was the main person in the war theater of this time. But in the 16th century, and this armors are from the 16th century, the troops have been specialized. So we have a heavy cavalry, a light cavalry, a heavy infantry, a light infantry, the musketeer, for example, and it was the difference.
Boy, it seems like you just get worn out just running in that stuff.
Dr. Kren, I appreciate you're not wearing a bulletproof vest or anything, are you?
No.
All right. Thank you very much for having us.
And thank you all.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.
They look hot.
For the athletically inclined, the Austrian Alps represent a towering challenge. And among those who have embraced it is Good Morning America's own Andy Mill, who is also a contributing editor at Men's Journal magazine. And he competed here in Innsbruck at the 1976 Olympics, and he recently hit the slopes once again with one of his former competitors.
Nestled in the Austrian Alps, Innsbruck is surrounded by some of the best ski runs in the world. People come here from all over Europe, all over the globe, to enjoy what the Austrians call Weißer Rausch, white ecstasy. Innsbruck hosted the 1964 and 1976 Winter Olympics. In 1976, I had the honor of skiing on the U.S. ski team and finished 6th in the downhill. But the man who won the gold that year in a race which many still call the most exciting minute and 47 seconds in all of sports was Franz Klammer. Recently, the King and I, if you'll pardon the pun, revisited our old stomping ground, the Olympic downhill run above Innsbruck. Not even the inclement weather could dampen our enthusiasm.
I had problems 20 years ago, I have problems today.
Yeah, me too. I know this jump exactly. You know, I almost fell here.
Almost went down, Frank.
Before we got down to serious downhill skiing, Franz and I decided to try a traditional alpine technique to get uphill. It's called skinning, and it requires attaching a felt-like material to the bottom of your skis to give you traction.
Well, Franz, this is the Olympic run. Andy, today we're doing differently. We hike up.
Nice and slowly.
Yeah. The lift is the easier way.
Skinning's not only a practical way to get up the slope, but it's also a great aerobic exercise.
It's good. I feel so alive when I do this. Yeah. You feel the heart and the blood going? Yeah. The lungs.
Finally, it was time to sit down, have a little Tyrolean snack, and talk about Innsbruck, past and present.
I always look up to this mountain. Well, that was the mountain. I did it, and that made me famous. And it's just a great feeling.
Knowledgeable sportsmen have said that is possibly one of the greatest moments in all of sports, your minute and 47 seconds.
He knows what he has to do.
I knew I'm going to win. I'm going for it. Doesn't matter the consequences, whether I wipe out or I will make it. And that's how I raced. I was just going for it, too strong, too straight sometimes, too low in tuck, and that's why I skied so wide.
I can't imagine what you'd be doing today had Andy Mill won that downhill almost 20 years ago.
Yeah, we wouldn't sit here together. So you might be here, but not me.
I think this is the only time in my life I've been ahead of you. It's been almost 20 years since Franz Klammer's fabled gold medal run, but today, he's still one of the most popular, recognized personalities in Austria.
It's incredible what a minute and 47 seconds has done to your life.
I mean, it changed my whole life, my entire life. Without this victory, I would have been a great skier, but not the Kaiser.
It may have been gray, cold, and snowy, but what a treat to be back in Innsbruck skiing with the King. Everywhere you look around this town, there are flags. The red and white flags you see are the Austrian colors. That is the Austrian flag. The green and white flags that you see represent Styria, because Graz is the capital of Styria, which is the second largest province, the second largest of 9 provinces in Austria. The green stands for the abundant forests that cover about 2/3 of the Styrian area, and the white stands for the glaciers high up in the mountains of the Alps. Our Steve Fox is here with us, and we sent him out on the back roads of Styria. Long and winding they are, and we asked him to come back with stories that interested him. And here's what he brought.
The countryside in Styria, a province in southeast Austria, is overwhelmingly rural and has remained largely unchanged for centuries. The land is crisscrossed with small roads leading through picturesque villages and dotted with countless tiny chapels. They've been making salad oil from pumpkin seeds at Peckman's old mill for more than 100 years, grinding the raw material into a sort of meal and then roasting it over a wood fire.
Sie können das auch probieren. Das schmeckt sehr
We can
gut.
try it.
Yes, it's perfect. It's excellent.
Yeah, we'll see. Tastes like pumpkin seed mush. Eventually, the mush is put under pressure and the pumpkin seed oil is squeezed out. Irmgard Schober used to be an assistant to a dentist. Her husband, Herbert, was an accountant. A year ago, they bought this place from her great-uncle and now proudly operate the oldest pumpkin mill in Styria.
Why do you do this for a living? You could have been, a happily employed dental technician. Why make pumpkin oil?
Mich fasziniert, mit Natur zu
Well, I
arbeiten.
feel it's just great working with the nature, because the pumpkin seed is a real product of the nature, and it was simply the old tradition that fascinated me.
So what do you want to do now? Visit maybe an ancient castle, the largest in this part of Austria? where they used to put witches on trial? Well, as fate would have it, that's exactly where we're headed. Work began on the Regensburg Castle in the year 1122. Over the centuries, it grew into a massive structure. 108 rooms and assorted gates and battlements and courtyards and colorfully painted ceilings. There are weapons on hand and a medieval torture device called an Iron Maiden. The family of the owner, Prince Friedrich Liechtenstein, hasn't lived here for more than a century. Today, the castle is mainly a museum. Traveling further south and close to the Slovenian border, we reach the largest of the thermal spas, which draw thousands of tourists to this area and provide hundreds of jobs. Think of this as a sort of hot water theme park. In the early 1970s, while drilling for oil, hot springs were discovered instead, along with a reliable supply of dirt from an extinct volcano. This stuff is mixed with steaming water and then applied to people with ailments, who are then wrapped up in thermal blankets. Mud treats rheumatic diseases?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
Yeah, of course.
Turns out that there's a long tradition of enjoying thermal spas in this part of Austria.
Oh, it dates back till the time of the Roman conquerors 2,000 years ago, and they brought this philosophy to Austria.
Of hanging around hot water.
Hanging around in hot water, yeah.
The streets are alive here in Graz, Austria, with the sounds of music.
And so we have now with us the choir of the Graz University for Music performing a traditional Austrian folk tune.
Many of the cities that we will be visiting over these 2 weeks, like Munich, have a town square, and they really are the focal point for all the residents, and as you can see, for a lot of tourists as well. And they are no accidents. They're not a coincidence.
No, that they're so much the same, city to city.
Yeah.
Munich City Square dates back to the 1100s. It's hard to believe, but where we're sitting, there has been a town square for about 850 years. And if you know where to look, you can pretty much read a European city's history in its square. One who knows how to do that is David Macaulay. He's an illustrator, but he's also the fellow who wrote that book, The Way Things Work. And he has written extensively and drawn castles and cathedrals, and we've brought him over here to talk a little bit about the city square here in Munich. And I gather we have a pretty good idea of what this square looked like 850 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that 850 years ago, this was probably just a widened street. It was built as a market. And this line through the square here, the east-west axis, was the main from the south to the north. and the streets that go in this direction, the north-south streets, intersected. And you can see it on the plan. The main intersection, you can see at the intersection we have the widening out of the street because the Duke at the time sensed that that would be a good place to build a market.
We're in the little fat place.
We're in the little fat place.
And then I gather this city grew because of the salt trade rather quickly.
Well, and then because of the trade in general, this is the next view, and you can see the little part we were just looking at is now in the center. The town has grown to 5 times its original size in roughly 100 years.
So then, once it became the square in the middle of the town, then what was its function?
Well, for about 500 years, it was basically the grain market. And it served as a market until about 1800. And then the town fathers in 1800 said, this is just, business is too good. We're going to have to move the market, and we will keep the square, and we will use the square now as more of a social center. Tournaments, there were executions here, all kinds of wonderful things have happened in the square.
It's called Marienplatz. How did it get that name?
It's called the Marienplatz because of the statue on the column above us is the statue of St. Mary from the cathedral, which is behind us. And after the Swedes left town, sometime in the mid-1600s, they celebrated by bringing the statue out, putting it on the column, and therefore the square becomes the Marienplatz.
As Joan mentioned, every European city seems to have a square like this one that dates back hundreds and hundreds of years. What do you look for when you come into a square like this?
Well, I think you look for how you feel when you come into a square like this. I mean, there are certain traditional buildings you're likely to find, like the town hall or like a main cathedral or something like that. Here we have the town hall, not the main cathedral. At the other end of the square, we have the old town hall. So this is kind of an interesting mix.
We should say now, this town hall, I think, was built in like 1909. So
it was finished in 1908, but it was begun in 1850.
So does it fit? Does it fit the square? I mean, because it got built a lot later.
You know, it doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, it's large and it's much more elaborate than any of the other buildings that would have been on the square during its history. But I think what's interesting to note is at the bottom of the building, all the arches are reminiscent of the arcades that used to run around the entire square. And that really, from the beginning, all the houses were an arcade. So it does fit in.
David, so many American cities have lost their focus, and we've gotten suburbanized, and everything's turned to the malls and the beltways that are around towns. And yet European cities seem to have maintained their downtown city square focus. Is there a reason for that?
I think it's because people still believe in taking care of the past. They still believe in holding on to a past that you can refer to as you move on into the future. We've sort of become disoriented. It's a new society, and we don't have this.
Is there much around here today in this square that really was from way back when?
Well, it's hard to tell with damage from the war and so on and so forth. But you know, it's how you take care of it. It's how you rebuild what is damaged. It's the fact that you believe that it is important to rebuild what is damaged.
Just before we go, you showed those 2 illustrations from way back, and you've sort of illustrated it as today, and you can see in today's illustration the similarities in the past. There we are.
There it is, right there.
There you go. Yeah.
And that's where you can see the new big town hall. We're right down there in the center.
And it's a massive structure compared to the stuff around it. But I think rhythmically, the facades of the buildings still hold together. They give this place a sense of outdoor living room, which is how it's often described. And, you know, in a living room, you're supposed to feel comfortable. You're supposed to feel self-assured. Well, you don't always feel that outside. But in a town square that works, I think that same sense of security.
I like the idea.
Is exactly what
everybody here seems to like the idea.
We're still in the little fat part that's been here for 850 years. David McCauley, great. And you're going to be with us tomorrow up at the castle,
Absolutely.
right?
Munich lies in the heart of the state of Bavaria, and no trip to this region would be complete without a trip outside the great city gates. And so now, Good Morning America's Steve Fox takes us on a trip through the fabled back roads of Bavaria.
Bavaria lies at the very heart of Europe, and its most scenic trail is the Alpine Road, which skirts the northern foothills of the mountains for 300 miles along the Austrian border. It is said that the typical Bavarian village features a church, a maypole, and its own small brewery. There are about 830 breweries in Bavaria. That's 1/3 of all the breweries in the entire world. Now, I have been to Germany a number of times for Good Morning America, but this is really the first chance I've had to get out of the big cities and venture into the countryside, which, by the way, is spectacular. First up today, the legacy of lederhosen. Lederhosen are those leather shorts which amount to the Bavarian national costume. In the village of Lenggries, the Baumer family operates one of only 20 shops that still make lederhosen the old-fashioned way, by hand. Starting with a hide of deerskin, it takes 2 full days to cut and paste and sew a pair of lederhosen. They can cost up to $750. This guy came here from Munich to buy a new pair to wear to church and to festivals. Let's talk about the embroidery. If you examine it closely, what can you determine?
I can say from which Lederhosen maker he comes.
From each individual maker you can
Yes.
detect? Huh.
And I can say from which area the people come.
The Bavarian Alps both shape the landscape and provide the raw material for one of this region's most distinctive local products, the brandy-like liquor known as schnapps. For centuries, Bavarians have been digging up the roots of an indigenous flower called Enzian and then fermenting and distilling it into a potent brew, 80-proof schnapps. The Grassel family was given the right to make Enzian schnapps back in 1602 by the folks who first came up with the idea, the residents of the monastery in the nearby town of Berchtesgaden.
The roots were known in the Middle Ages as a medication, and the monks of the monastery told Mr. Grassel how to make schnapps out of the roots. The schnapps really taste a little like a root, and it's somewhat bitter. That is what you taste.
You could run the space shuttle on that. The next day brought us to our last stop, the storybook-perfect Bavarian village of Mittenwald. On the colorfully painted buildings in town, you can sometimes find depictions of stringed instruments. Mittenwald was in the grips of an economic depression in the late 1600s when Matthias Klotz returned from an apprenticeship in Italy with the knowledge of how to make violins. Today, Mittenwald's handful of violin craftsmen are internationally renowned. According to Michael Kramer, one of the most important elements is high-quality wood that has been aged properly.
So the wood I use is, the most wood is about more than 40 years on stock. 40, 50 years on stock. The wood I use now is from my granduncle. From the second generation, I'm now in the fourth generation.
So who's going to use this wood?
I hope everybody after me, maybe in 50 years.
Michael's family began making violins 300 years ago, but decided to specialize in double bass instruments in the late 1880s. The technique has been passed down from generation to generation.
So I grew up in my daddy's workshop, and so I think I get the feeling for these instruments.
You didn't, like, read a book about how to do it?
No. I just work with the wood.
Do you play yourself?
Yes, but for me it's enough to play only. So I know where the tones are, and I think it's very important to know these.
That was Moon River, wasn't it?
I don't know.
For centuries, Germans have been fascinated, some tormented, by a very strong wind that blows through this area. Our science editor Michael Gillen blew into town to take a look at this strange German phenomenon.
You can't see it, but you can definitely feel it. It's hot and dry like the Santa Ana winds in Southern California. It's called the Föhn, and people say it's no fun at all.
Normally you get a pressure on your head. In this area, sometimes in this area.
Dizzy, yes, like dizzy. Strange feeling.
In the small town of Solothurn, Switzerland, 30-year-old computer scientist Ben Stoker says the Föhn is a real pain.
I get a bad mood first, then I feel bad. I can't eat nothing. Then I get pains in the head.
It all starts with a southerly wind. As the wind rises over the towering Alps, it cools off and drops its moisture. The leftover dry wind heats up as it careens down the other side.
Nun die Wettervorhersage für morgen Samstag.
Föhn forecasts are part of the daily weather report in many parts of Germany, Switzerland, and Austria.
This is what we use to measure wind speed.
German meteorologist Gerd Jendritsky says Föhns usually hit during the spring and autumn months and always make a dramatic entrance.
When the Föhn arrives, suddenly temperature jumps up to 20 to 30 degrees, humidity drops, and wind velocity makes also a jump, and people are disturbed by this change.
On the streets, in the beer gardens, in the beauty salons, everyone here talks about the Föhn, which, by the way, is also the German word for blow dryer.
Though many scientists say the fern is just a lot of hot air, dozens of doctors like Fritz Jenkner from Vienna claim to have documented the fern's effects on some folks.
During the fern, the number of suicides increases very much. The number of depressed people becomes larger, and what is very important during fern, the number of car accidents is about double as much as on a day without fern.
If we accept the evidence that the fern affects people's health, then the question becomes this. Is it the high temperature, the low humidity? What exactly is it about the fern that makes people feel bad? Hans Rischner is a physicist at the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, Switzerland. He blames the fern's sudden pressure changes.
We did a study which showed a very positive correlation between the amplitude of the pressure fluctuation, that is the intensity of the pressure variation, and the general well-being of people. And this correlation is beyond any doubt.
Whatever the explanation, Europeans say it's not all in their heads. It's in the wind and an unavoidable part of life here, which means whenever the fern blows, Ben Stoker, for one, will always be forced to miss work and hide out in a cold, dark room.
And David Macaulay is with us again today. We introduced him to you yesterday. He is the author and illustrator of the fine book, The Way Things Work. For our purposes today, more important, another book that he wrote and illustrated called Castles. And so he is a pretty good expert to tell us about the Marksburg Castle. We went through one of the doors earlier on, David. I gather there are a series of doors that were used. Is that right?
4 doors altogether. This is number 4. The last bastion.
Let's go on up through number 4. It is lined, I notice, with what, iron?
With iron. Iron plates actually bolted to the front of this door.
Was the weakest, actually, way of defense? I mean, once you got through
the doors were always the weak spot in the walls.
They were.
If you get through the doors, it's all over.
Would there have been some sort of wood reinforcement here?
Yeah, on across or in front of us, actually. 2 doors here.
There's some problem throughout.
I think a major problem. There is here, but these would have been used to get water from the cistern, which collected rainwater, and a well which apparently came up to the castle. So this would have been, water would have been moved around in these.
But everything, you must understand, is vertical in here, so getting water up and down is tough. And this is one way of getting water out, and some other things out as well, I would presume.
It's the drainage system, and I'm sure the sewage system at times, collecting rainwater from the inner courtyard.
Very crude, but I guess that's what you did 850 years ago. Now we're going to walk up here a little further, and this gives you a sense, I guess, of the kind of tight living space that was up here.
It's very close, as you can see, and it doesn't look too friendly from here. Still, if people got in here, you'd have to defend. So from up there, you'd be dropping things, throwing things, whatever you could find, basically.
Right. All right, let's head on up the steps here, and we're headed toward, what is this?
The keep, the central tower. Ultimately, the last bastion of defense if everything else fails.
Now, you've drawn some interesting illustrations of the keep. Now, I know it never existed in solitary, but you drew it by itself. Why?
Just to show the size of this thing and the fact that it perches right on top of the hill. The rest of the castle is built around it in a series of rings. The first set of rings is buildings, what we can see here, and then a set of walls lower down.
Now, those buildings, which came in later years, this dates to the beginning of this, to about the 12th century, right?
That's right.
Now, the later buildings, as they were built around, and a few of them were original, but as they were built around, they were built for purposes of function, or did they have to sort of stick with the topography?
Well, the topography was a major limiting factor here. You'd try to get the necessary functions, dining halls, and so on and so forth. As time passed, the population of the castle probably increased, and therefore you needed more space for things. This was much more open in the 13th century and the 12th century than it is now.
Very, very thick walls, and built right on the foundation of the rock.
That's the slate rock on which this whole thing is built, and the towers itself and the walls are also built of slate.
There was a covering of plaster, I gather, over this. We see the slate now, but
I think because of the rain that would be blown in and so on and so forth.
Now, you also drew the bottom of the keep, and I gather that shows just, A, how thick the walls of the keep were. But this had no actual practical function other than defense, right?
Other than defense, that 6-foot thick wall basically supports a 120-foot high tower. Things would be stored in here. And as I say, in last defense, you'd hide in here.
You would take to this keep. I mean, all it really existed for was to save you if you were under attack. Now, Joan is up on the balcony, right?
Yeah, can you hear me up here?
I can hear you.
I'm pretty high up. I'm on the balcony, and this is the keep right inside. I'll go in and I'll tell the folks what it looks like. It's a 3 C's in my opinion. It's cold, cramped, and creepy. This is not a kind of place you'd want to spend any time. Then again, if you were under attack, I imagine it'd be pretty good looking. But to me, if you had a prisoner, this is the really creepy place to put them. Yuck. Okay, Charlie.
All right, Joan. What else about this? This part of the buildings, the living quarters, were added what time?
1700s, the early 1700s. This is the slate construction. You can see the window frames are cut stone, and then the walls are just built of these massive pieces of slate, all sort of wedged in together. The newer buildings tend to be more timber construction with lath and plaster.
What am I trying to say? Lath and plaster.
Between them.
Or plath and laster. That's okay, too.
And then pasted over with a good coat of cement, which is then painted.
I can't imagine how drafty this would have been come winter.
That less so than this. That's why this was also covered with plaster when it was first built, to help prevent some of the draft and drainage, seepage through the walls.
Yeah, and you'd also be so isolated up here. I mean, I suppose people would come and visit, but it does seem so strange to be living by yourself at the top of a mountain.
Well, 20 people, more or less. A group of 20 people in the 13th, 12th, 13th, 14th centuries lived up here. Must have been a very lonely existence, but a safe one.
All right, David McCauley. Back to the Marksburg Castle, and how about this for a dark, dank staircase in the middle of a medieval turret? Well, we have seen in our few days here in Germany and Austria how much folk dance and folk music play a part in the local life. So, too, do folk tales. Indeed, some of the best and most often told bedtime stories come from this area because the Brothers Grimm were born here. And our entertainment editor, Joel Siegel, found out that their stories really come alive in the villages that surround us.
400-year-old half-timber houses, narrow cobblestone streets. It's like stepping into a fairy tale. Which fairy tale? This is Alsfeld, Little Red Riding Hood's hometown. That's Bernadette and Christina. Guten Tag. 300-400 years ago, this was the native costume. Somehow, whoops, I think Bernadette is off to visit her grandmother's house. Did little girls go to visit their grandmothers? Certainly. Did big bad wolves come to call? Maybe when the girls became teenagers. Is there any truth to the story? There may be, and I know when it happened. Once upon a time. Germany's fairy tale road takes you back to a time of enchanted forests guarded by magic castles. In the town of Sababurg, Sleeping Beauty's castle. Well, who's to say it isn't? Oh, Mr. Trowell, can Rapunzel come out and play? I know she's here. This is Rapunzel's tower in a town called Trendelburg. But is it really? That may be a fairy tale, too. Rapunzel! Maybe she's out getting a haircut. It was awfully long last time I saw her. The fairy tale road starts in Hanau, birthplace of Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. They started collecting their stories in the university town of Marburg, where they lived on Barfußstraße. That's Barefoot Street, over what's a shoe store today. What's special about this house?
This house is the base or the origin for the fairy tale of the little brave tailor.
The brave little tailor lived and worked in this house?
He lived here in this house.
Do you think he really killed 7 with one blow?
Why not? 7 little things.
Snow White is a Grimm fairy tale, and Hansel and Gretel, and Rumpelstiltskin, and the Frog Prince. The Brothers Grimm never wrote a fairy tale. College professors, they collected the stories, and they didn't publish their stories for children. This English translation, 1823, was the first to be illustrated. After that, it was Happily Ever After, but not for the Brothers Grimm. Did they make a lot of money, the Brothers Grimm?
No, the Brothers Grimm didn't make a lot of money because the success of the fairy tales came only after the death of the Brothers Grimm.
Today at the Grimm Museum in Kassel, there are more than 10,000 volumes of Brothers Grimm fairy tales in more than 100 languages. Didn't know Hansel and Gretel speak Hebrew, or Little Red Riding Hood speaks Japanese. These are the Bremen musicians in Togo. I just bought these in St. Petersburg. Dopey, Happy, Sneezy, and Infinitesimal. From Arabic to Esperanto, the stories are told all over the world.
The good things will be belohnt,
rewarded,
and that cruel things will be punished. And to show to the people, to the grown-ups and to the children in a very clear way what is right and what is wrong.
All over the world, parents want their children to be kind, to be patient, to keep away from strangers, and to live happily ever after.
You know, it's not every day that you get to wake up in a castle, and I mean the real McCoy. This one is called Castle Reinsfeld, and it's nestled on the shore just above the Rhine River. Believe it or not, this is one of about 40 in a very small neighborhood, and I found a great guy to give us a tour. He's a castle expert. Actually, he's a medievalist.
Castles represent to us romanticism, the lost past, the age of chivalry and knights, and it's something that we imagine to have been very beautiful. And the Rhine is the central place for castles in Germany. This was a primary traffic or trading route in the Middle Ages between Northern and Southern Europe. Anybody build a castle, any baron build a castle on the Rhine would be able to take tolls and taxes from merchants traveling by.
About when were these castles built?
I think stone castles on the Rhines were built in the 12th century first. Most of them built in the 13th and 14th century. They were made ruins mostly in the 17th century at the time of King Louis XIV of France.
So he destroyed them?
He destroyed them, his soldiers did. They blew them up with mines because Louis XIV did not want the German castle barons to interfere with the shipping on the Rhine.
And when they become ruins, that was really the beginning of our interest in the Romanticism.
Yes. The Romantics, the poets, and the writers discovered the ruined castles as representing the lost past.
Was that actually the beginning of what we know in history books as the Romantic period?
Yes, the Romantics discovered this beautiful time when there was Christianity and everybody had faith.
What are we coming up on here?
This is the Lorelei Rock, the narrowest part of the Rhine, and there's a myth, a legend about a young woman, a water spider mermaid sitting on that rock. And as the boatsmen would come around the bend, they would be spellbound by the beauty of this maiden, and they would not watch the rocks in the water.
Someday my prince will come.
Now this is Rheinfels Castle, the center of German Romanticism. Even Hans Christian Andersen came down here and actually wrote some fairy tales. We're now climbing into the underground tunnel, and they reach a long way from the castle underground as mines. Can you imagine running through these long tunnels underground in total darkness, carrying a bomb in your hand for hundreds of yards? And now going into the former East Germany to the Wartburg Castle up on that hill.
Beautiful.
That's the drawbridge to Wartburg Castle. When an enemy came, you would pull it up. And up there, there's a way to defend the gate.
Yeah.
You could drop stones down or boiling water.
Boiling water?
Right.
Yow!
Yeah. Wartburg Castle is one of the places of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther, when he was banished, hid out in the Wartburg in 1521, and he translated the New Testament.
We are 5 hours away from the Wartburg Castle, and it's snowing here. It's wonderful.
Well, we're in the Bavarian Alps. This is Neuschwanstein.
Why does this castle look so familiar to me?
Walt Disney based Cinderella's castle on Neuschwanstein.
How did it come to be built?
Ludwig II was a melancholy romantic, and he loved the music of Richard Wagner. He saw a performance of Tannhäuser in Munich and asked the set designer to design a castle just like the one he saw on stage.
That's really taking Romanticism to the extreme, isn't it?
It is indeed. They are the most visible reminder of the medieval past.
So the older they get, the more romantic they become.
Indeed they are.
I am standing by one of the last remaining pieces of the Berlin Wall, kind of a symbol of the old divided city. Right now, though, our own Steve Fox takes a look at the new Berlin, which was created in the aftermath of the fall of the wall.
It went up in 1961, and for the next 28 years, it defined the city. 103 miles of concrete and barbed wire that completely surrounded West Berlin. And then, in one amazing night, the wall became history. On November 9th, 1989, ordinary people began tearing it down. and the Cold War began to unravel during a massive street party.
Very exciting, and there happened so much in 3 weeks.
It's the most historic moment in this city.
I was there to see it happen and interviewed Walter Momper, who was mayor of West Berlin at the time. Like many politicians back then, Momper underestimated how quickly the world would change.
We have polls about GDR people who were in West Berlin, and they say 73% of them said they don't wish reunification.
Don't want reunification.
No, and it's the same on our side.
In fact, unification came less than a year later. Today, the wall has almost completely disappeared, except for a few decaying traces. But while the wall itself may now be gone, there are still significant psychological barriers which separate the people of East and West Berlin.
We have learned how difficult it is to come together again after 40 years of division, of being divided from each other, and how different people developed in these 40 years.
Professor Hans Merkens has been conducting a long-term attitudinal study among young people from both East and West Berlin.
The wall is broken down, but now a new wall is built up, a wall in the heads, because there are different views of the people in East and West Berlin.
Money is a big part of the problem. The East is still poor. Unemployment there stands at 15%, and everyone's taxes have gone up substantially to pay for the $80 billion a year in improvements being spent in the former communist sector. Tax dollars are subsidizing low rents for the high-tech startup companies in this new office building. Uwe Rosenkranz used to work for the East German government as an engineer. He began his small company for the most basic of reasons.
The wall came down, and some days later I was without any job. And so I had to try to find out what is to do in the future.
There is a general feeling that Berliners were too optimistic when the wall came down and are too pessimistic now. It is true that the lifelong social safety net has disappeared in the East, but East Berlin also enjoys the strongest economic growth rate in all of Europe, 9% a year. Meanwhile, what's left of the wall continues to crumble.
The good sides of the old days, that's what they really want. But I don't think, even if the people say so, that they really want to have the old days back. And
they don't want the wall back?
No, they don't want the wall back, no.
One thing for sure, the post-wall building boom is in full swing. Everywhere you look, there is construction work going on. And when it comes to hard work, it's hard to beat the Germans. However, the German worker seems to kind of have the best of both worlds. While their hard work means higher pay, it doesn't necessarily mean longer hours. However, our money editor, Tyler Matheson, found that that may not last.
Imagine if your job came with the following: world-class wages, 6 weeks of vacation from day one, plus 8 personal days and 11 national holidays, an automatic Christmas bonus equal to 1 month's salary, up to 3 years of maternity leave for mothers and fathers, and one of the world's shortest work weeks with flexible hours at that. Well, you can stop imagining, because this workers' paradise really exists today, right here in Germany. This is GM's Opel car manufacturing plant outside of Frankfurt, and its 25,000 workers enjoy some of the highest pay, best benefits, and top working conditions in the world.
Arbeite, zu leben und lebe nicht, zu arbeiten.
I live not to work, but I work to live.
Olaf Binder spends 37 hours a week as a mechanic at Opel. And like millions of solidly middle-class German workers, he values what he considers to be a balanced life.
Because we have shorter working hours, we can spend more time with family and friends and have a lot more time for leisure time activities. This year we want to go to Spain. We want to go camping.
American Hans Wildschut is an engineer at Opel and has worked in the auto industry in both the U.S. and, for the past couple of years, in Germany. It didn't take him long to see that Germans have different ideas than Americans when it comes to the workplace.
I think there's a very strong implied contract between the worker and the company. The company provides the job. You don't have to worry about getting laid off. You just have to worry about doing the best possible job you can.
In large companies like Opel, the guardians of this social contract between management and labor are so-called work councils. Established by law, these elected bodies act as in-house arbiters to make sure that both sides play by the rules on wages, benefits, and working conditions. When management wants a worker to work overtime, do they come to you and have to get your
They
permission?
have to ask us, is it allowed to do this overtime, yes or no? But if we say spend overtime, we want to get some benefits for the workers. That's the social balance here in Germany.
There are those who believe, however, that there could be trouble brewing in this workers' paradise as Germany's rich pay and benefits packages begin to clash with the requirements of an intensely competitive global marketplace.
In Germany, the fringe benefits are almost 100% of the wages. And that's certainly something that has to be corrected. Our competitors hardly ever have more than 50% fringe benefits over wage costs. And the procedure in Germany has caused jobs to go offshore. In the end, the labor market is going to suffer.
American business people in Germany who lived through the corporate restructurings of the 1980s and 90s in the U.S. think they know what Germans are in for.
Major German industry are opening plants and production facilities outside of Germany to have low-cost products and services that they can sell to the global market. So this is coming, whether the workers want it or not.
For German worker Olaf Bender and millions like him in factories and offices all across the country, the next few years will tell whether paradise gained will become paradise lost.
Before the Berlin Wall came down, Checkpoint Charlie had become a symbol, both of this divided city and of the Allies' commitment to keep at least one border crossing between East and West open. Our Steve Fox this morning takes a look at this monument to one of history's great standoffs.
It was perhaps the most searing single image of the Cold War. American and Soviet troops and tanks facing off at Checkpoint Charlie. The year was 1961. Many feared that World War III was just a hair trigger away. 29 years later, Checkpoint Charlie was ceremoniously dismantled as high-ranking officials looked on. Today, the American Business Center is being constructed on the site of the most famous Cold War gateway between East and West Berlin. Half a block away stands the Checkpoint Charlie Museum, which has been open for 3 decades. Its displays pay tribute to the ingenuity and courage of the thousands of people who escaped from the East by hot air balloon, hidden inside of suitcases or in the engine compartment of cars. Some even leapt to freedom from buildings that adjoined the wall. And it is a memorial to the 680 people believed to have died trying to escape. People like 18-year-old Peter Fechter, shot by East German border guards in 1962 and left to bleed to death in plain sight as a lesson to others. Klaus Klein was 32 years old and his wife Eva was 29 when they crawled to freedom in the longest tunnel ever dug under the wall. At the time, their son Jonk was 3, the same age as his daughter today.
We were extremely afraid, we were terrified, and it became clear to us we have to go. We were scared of the tunnel, we were scared of a trap maybe laid by the secret police.
The majority of the 200,000 people who visit the museum every year are young, under the age of 27. For them, Checkpoint Charlie amounts to not-so-ancient history, gone, but not forgotten.
I don't think you should forget this. I think people should remember, and it is especially important that young people, children, learn about this.
There's injustice, and you're just not allowed to forget about injustice, because once you start forgetting about injustice, then you're making it possible to revive.
World War II claimed 50 million lives, military and civilian. That is more than any other war in history. 73,000 plus of the Americans who died in the European theater of the war remain buried in Europe in a number of U.S. military cemeteries in places like Normandy and Luxembourg and Ardennes. One of the U.S. military cemeteries is right near here, our town of Maastricht. It is in the town of Margraten, and Steve Fox is there. The cemetery is a beautiful place, and Steve's going to show a little bit of it to you. Steve?
Good morning, Charlie. It is probably true that the American Military Cemetery in Normandy is the most famous in all of Europe, but Margraten is really only slightly smaller. Here, the graves of 8,302 soldiers are marked with either a simple marble cross or a Star of David. Here also is a memorial wall engraved with the names of 1,722 soldiers lost in the war whose remains were never found. This is the only permanent U.S. military cemetery in the Netherlands and one of the largest in Europe. So on a day like this, VE Day, it's a very special place for the American veterans who return here and for the local people who commemorate the event as well. Joining me now are two American veterans who helped liberate Maastricht in September of 1944, Frank Towers and Francis Curry. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Frank, let me start with you. What was the liberation of Maastricht like? Was there a lot of fighting?
There was not very much fighting in the town itself. As we crossed the river, the Germans were on the run coming out across on the other bridge.
What about civilian reaction in town?
There was a great amount of jubilation. They were happy to see us come. They were really in the way of fighting a war. It was unbelievable the way the people were reacting and coming out into the streets and rejoicing.
While the fighting was happening, they were partying.
While the fighting was going on. They could care less.
Francis Curry, I'm interested in your recollections of VE Day 50 years ago when you were in the midst of the fighting.
Well, on VE Day 50 years ago, my company was dug in up along the Elbe River up at Magdeburg.
You were a 19-year-old rifleman.
I was a 19-year-old platoon leader at that time.
And what were your thoughts? The war is over, they tell you.
My thoughts were, the war is over. We did a good job.
All right. Frank Towers, your recollection of VE Day?
Well, I was in a similar situation at Magdeburg, and we were informed then that we were going to the Pacific to finish fighting that war down there, so we weren't too happy about it. But the fact that the war in Europe was over, we were happy for that.
Francis Curry, you won a congressional, actually you received a Congressional Medal of Honor for your action during the Battle of the Bulge. You were invited to the Arlington Cemetery celebration today. We were pleased that you came here with us instead. Should people think of this day as a celebration of peace, or is this a day of remembrance?
I prefer it as a day of remembrance.
A platoon sergeant you served under is buried here.
Well, it was served with, yes, Charles McCullough.
And what are your thoughts when you visit his grave?
Very emotional.
Yeah? Tell me if you can.
Well, Charlie and I went through the Bulge together. We were both promoted. We were both platoon sergeants at the same time, and he was killed right below here in February as we crossed the Roy River.
Frank Towers, there is a tradition here, a very touching tradition. Local people have adopted each and every one of the graves here. Where did that tradition start?
That started right here with a man by the name of Joe Lars, who was a town clerk in Margraten. He got a group of people together and formed the organization that has grown, and today each one of the graves in Margraten is adopted by one or more families.
Now, what do you mean adopted? What do they do?
They consider this grave as their own son. They come here once or twice a year, sometimes more, and place flowers on their adoptee's grave.
50 years later, this continues?
50 years later, it happens all the time. There's never a time that I come out here, but there are flowers, there are people decorating the graves of their adopted son.
I can't help but wonder how that makes the two of you guys feel. I mean, you fought, you had friends who died in this conflict. Now to see that kind of appreciation from the people of the Netherlands, can you tell me how you react to that?
Well, we feel great to know that our efforts were not in vain, that these men have not been forgotten. Their parents, their next of kin may be all deceased, but these people remember them as their liberators, and they respect them.
Francis, your thoughts?
Well, I go along with Frank on that. It is very nice that the people do remember that. To our knowledge, this is the only national cemetery in Europe that this has occurred.
Sort of makes it seem all the more worthwhile, I guess.
It does, it does.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning.
As we have mentioned through the morning, our geography editor, Harm de Blay, is himself a native of the Netherlands and rode out the war as a small boy in the small town of Soestdijk. And he had never returned to that hometown and his house since the war. but he did last week, and I gather it was a very emotional trip. Harm?
50 years ago, Charlie, I was there when the bombs dropped on Rotterdam. My parents moved to a small village, and there was my home for 5 critical years of my life. I was able to visit it again. It was an emotional experience, and here's a small survey of it. I went back to my village, Soesdijk, where I attended the commemorations of the Second World War. I was here during the years 1940 to 1945, and I haven't been back in 50 years. This was my opportunity to relive those days. Here is where I live, and the present occupants of the home, Mr. and Mrs. Zwier Nederlof, were kind enough to invite me in to see what the house looks like now. From a child's point of view, the essentials are still there. My room upstairs, from which I could see the street in which so many momentous things happened during the Second World War. Well, it's a lot smaller than I remember it. One morning in the fall of 1944, I woke up, looked out the window, and there in that little park and in front of it was about a dozen Nazi soldiers with machine guns looking at the house. They were looking for my father. My mother hurried me down the stairs and out the house, the back, and to neighbors. And my dad managed to hide in a special place. He never was found. And this was my father's hiding place. There was a steel-plated fireplace here, and my dad hid behind it, and my father and mother pulled the plate against the opening so that he could not be found, and they did not find him. However, in other houses, the soldiers were smarter. They shot right through those fireplaces, and anyone sitting behind them was killed. Because of the location of our village between the advancing Allies and the retreating Germans, we had to spend 3 weeks in this 8x12 basement protecting ourselves against bombs from both sides. Here stood the Viersprong, a beautiful Alsatian-style villa that formed the centerpiece of my village. The Germans ordered it destroyed in 1944 after an attack on one of their facilities. They gave the occupants 15 minutes to get out with what belongings they could carry. The war deprived me and many other children of the joys of childhood. Survival became the essence of life, even for children my age.
The larder in that house, you saw it for just a moment, a lot of food there, but there was no food during the war.
There was no food then. The hunger winter had deprived the whole area of virtually all its sustenance. My mother took a long 100-mile walk to the north with her bicycle to bring back bags of potatoes. We had some fruit trees, and those were really the things that kept us alive.
And 50 years ago today, I gather you were fairly emaciated.
Yes, my dad and I were both down at the end of the war. My mother was the only one who was strong enough to survive and maintain the family. My dad was, I've seen him, he's 90, they're both living in Boca Grande, Florida now. I've rarely seen him in bed. He was in bed for many weeks. I was in bed for 7 weeks before being able to get back up again.
Just because of emaciation at the end of the war.
That's right.
Very emotional to go back there.
It was. My friends, the Nederlofs, who were kind enough to receive me, actually invited some of my old school friends who had also gone through the war with me, with whom I had the experiences that I describe in the tape. And I had not expected that, and it was a terribly emotional event to suddenly see Hans Koch and Bernhard Battenberg, my old names I've remembered all my life and never thought I'd see again.
The kids you were playing hide and seek with.
That's right.
When you were a child. Did you feel still a kinship with them, or do you feel that so many years and so many experiences have passed that you're no longer a part of that?
Well, our interaction was very interesting. I would say the answer is that we've drifted apart, both geographically and also in terms of what we do. Our lives have taken a different turn. The village is not the village we all remember. There was even a kind of a reticence to talk about those war years. It was very interesting. We were more interested in talking about family affairs since the war than to recount the unpleasant experiences we had
then. The
war
is still that sensitive a subject.
Well, Charlie, you know, all of us were very lucky. I mean, I talk about it deprived of my childhood having been ruined by the war. A lot of people had it far, far worse. So we all, I think, tacitly recognize that and try not to look back upon it too negatively.
Harm, you tell that story, which makes your heart grab even now, about your father hiding behind the fireplace. Why did they want him?
Well, my father was connected to the underground. He also had committed a public act of resistance. He was a musician, and he complained of not being well when he was forced to play the German national anthem at a critical moment on the radio.
And refused to play it? And they wanted him for that?
That's right.
They were after him to do what?
Probably to be sent to a labor gang to work in Germany somewhere on a road or a dam or perhaps in those rocket factories.
How often in those 5 years did the Nazis come looking for him?
Well, I remember two principal events. My mother used to get a warning and send me away before it happened. He had someone who tipped him off, and that's how he survived.
Well, Harm de Blay, thank you for sharing what I know was an emotional and rather personal moment.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you very much. In this country, there is a situation where there is water everywhere, and in many instances you have to look up to see it. Because as we've mentioned, more than 60% of this country lies below sea level. So keeping land dry in this country is job number one for the Dutch scientists and engineers. And our science editor, Michael Gillen, this morning has a look at the way they do it.
The Dutch are winning the war. In the last century, they've seized more than 1 million acres of land from the surrounding rivers and sea, pumped it bone dry, first using old-fashioned windmills, and now using devices that boggle the engineering imagination. But the war continues along two fronts. The first along the coast, where gigantic dikes are struggling to hold back the North Sea. Back in 1953, the sea broke through here, and the Dutch suffered their worst defeat.
It was very bad. Almost 2,000 people are drowned there. And also the cattle and some people, you saw them into the water, dead. And it was a disaster. It was a big disaster, yeah.
The second battlefront is in the south, along the River Rhine and the River Maas. After a century of tranquility, these rivers have flooded twice in the last 2 years. Most recently in February, when 250,000 people were forced from their homes.
It's amazing, and you see the water is coming up, almost 5 to 10 centimeters an hour. And it's very high. It's frightening. It's very frightening.
The recent flooding is being blamed on record rainfall and on record snowmelt from the nearby Alps. Some say it's all because of global warming. Whatever the reason, the Dutch are worried, and they're turning to science for help.
At Delft Hydraulics, water engineers are working out a strategy for fighting the floods. Their conclusion? Defenses along the River Rhine need to be bolstered immediately.
The problem is that the dikes along the Rhine River date back to the 15th century. And there are plans available to heighten them and strengthen them, but there's a lot of debate in society about the question, how should they be strengthened?
Traditionally, strengthening the dikes has meant making them wider, but that robs the Dutch of some precious real estate.
There certainly are alternatives. One way to do that is to hammer steel sheets in the core of the dike. That comes as a price. It's much more expensive than the traditional method, but there's certainly a big advantage to it, namely that you do not have to destroy the existing housing, and you can leave the natural and cultural values in place.
To prevent flooding along Holland's other southern river, the Maas, engineers are broadening it, removing 35 million tons of gravel from its banks. As the river spreads out, it'll create a natural wetland, a buffer zone, great for absorbing floodwaters and more, as environmentalist Don Shepard showed me.
Don, this is beautiful. Is this the way it's all going to look when it's done?
Yes, up along the river, wild horses, a whole lot of wildlife. That's what we think that's going to happen.
Widening the River Maas represents a rare surrender of land to the dreaded enemy, the water. But in 10 years, when these buffer zones become wide open spaces full of natural beauty, it'll also represent a rare triumph for a country 95% of which is covered by farms, concrete, and city centers.
This is a very international area. As a matter of fact, this area at various times has been dominated by the French, the Germans, the Spanish, the Austrian, the Dutch. This area has had a close relationship with England because of water commerce. We're only 8 miles from the sea.
And of course, now today, people from all those countries and even more come here to Belgium to see the sights. And now we open our Belgium picture book and take a glimpse at some of the things they'll see.
are looking at is the rear of one of the Bruges buildings that overlooks one of the city's canals. I am actually standing in the front, and this building is a very good example of the great pains that Bruges town officials go to preserve this town's medieval charm and beauty. The Belgian town of Bruges appears to be frozen in time. The city has changed little since the 15th century, when the Zwin River silted up. And that cut Bruges off from the North Sea, and the once bustling commercial port died. The lack of economic activity, however, helped preserve Bruges' medieval appearance. Along narrow and winding streets, you can see buildings dating back to 1727, 1654, 1621, and MDCCXLV III. Many of these charming old houses are adorned with delightfully unusual sculptures. Look up and you can easily spot a bear, a basket, a cat, or over there, a snail. It's no accident that these old buildings are in such fine condition. Historic preservation is practically a religion here. If the doors of the houses on this residential street look freshly painted, that's because they are. If the paint is peeling, or your home's appearance is judged to be declining, you must pay a fine. But the city also helps keep your property looking good, providing up to 40% of preservation and restoration costs. You can also earn a subsidy if your shop's sign has artistic merit. Old buildings are rarely torn down, whether the project is small or as large as the 10-year, $40 million restoration of St. Salvatore's Cathedral. When there is new construction, the new is built at the same scale as the old. Even this brand new, ultra-modern hotel blends in nicely with its neighbors. So while Bruges appears to have been untouched for centuries, don't be fooled. Yes, at times the horse-drawn carriages seem to outnumber the cars, but the city is marching forward, although to the beat of its own drummer. Bruges is a place where the future will always depend on the past.
I have here an example of some of the fine lace handiwork that is done here in Bruges. And Bruges is very famous for its lace. You can find this stuff everywhere, from lace shops to street vendors. And in warm weather, you can find ladies, young and old, sitting outside actually weaving the lace. But it is not only famous for lace, it's also famous for tapestries and other kind of textiles like linens and wools. Linen is made from a plant called flax. Flanders Laga Linen Company receives its raw materials from all over Europe. No doubt you've heard of Irish linen. Here, the thread is put onto huge spools. The humidity level is carefully controlled so the thread won't dry out, become brittle, and then break. The yarn is next combed by hand. The threads must all be parallel. One crossed thread could mean big headaches in the next step of the manufacturing process, weaving. These machines operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Electronically controlled, the threads are inserted into the loom 400 times a minute. That's more than 6 times a second. The linen woven here is used to make canvas, embroidery linen, home textiles, and clothing, made by such well-known names as Chanel, Banana Republic, and Polo. After the weaving, each roll is checked for minute errors and repaired by hand. In all, Laga produces more than 1 million yards of linen each year. You may have seen tapestries like these on the walls of old castles, a type of medieval wallpaper for royalty. Most are centuries old. Flanders' tapestry industry once employed 50,000. Today, the house of Gaspard de Witt, with only 20 employees, is the last remaining company here of its kind. Here, million-dollar masterworks are cleaned in a unique patented process called aerosol suction. They are painstakingly restored by hand. The house also sells both antique and new, more abstract works. Of course, the best-known fabric produced in Belgium is Belgian lace. The beautiful, intricate patterns are famous around the world. This type will cost you about $2,000 a yard. This antique, $6,000. But if you're looking for something a bit more reasonable, you can always buy a souvenir for under $10.
And we have come now into the courtyard of the town hall here in Aix-en-Provence. You know, a lot of people come to this part of the world and decide never to leave it. One of them is a British writer and expatriate, Julian Moore. He has been a resident of the Provence region now for more than 2 decades. We asked him what it was that appealed to him so about this region. And he said, I'll show you. And he does, in our picture book of Provence.
When Americans think of the perfect French countryside, they often think of Provence, a place that has attracted foreigners since the ancient Greeks. I'm Julian Moore, and I moved here from London 19 years ago, and I've been writing about Provence ever since. I'd like to let you into 1 or 2 secrets about what makes Provence such a great place to live. Don't tell anyone, will you? Our first stop, the farmer's market in Coustelet, where one can buy the exotic products of the region. These are something very unusual. They are squash flowers, and you fry them, and they make the most delicious, well, you can have them at the beginning of the meal, you can put them with salads or whatever. They're really great. I love them. One of my favorites. This man is selling lavender honey and hydromel, an aperitif made from bee pollen. Many people here are trying to preserve the quality of life against the modern barbarians. Potters come to find their inspiration in the wild highlands of Provence. Cheesemakers make their goat's cheese in the traditional way, and I do absolutely nothing as elegantly as possible. This part of the highlands of Provence is absolutely littered with fortified towns like this one, where the medieval barons used to welcome their neighbors by dropping stones on them from the top of the gate. The tourist town of Gordes is very popular for snapshots, but I prefer the simpler pleasures of Banon, where I can walk under Renaissance archways and see not a soul. The coastline between Marseille and Cassis is indented with little creeks called calanques, which are not easy to get to except by boat. Great fun for rock climbing, just lazing on the beach or paddling about. Wow! Oh la la! They're splashing me. They're very jolly girls, I must say. Fish are sometimes hard to come by here. Oh yes, he's just looking for little fishes, because I thought he might be looking for bouillabaisse, which are the tiny fish that you make the basic soup for one of the really great dishes of the Mediterranean, bouillabaisse. And the best fish for that are found in these very waters around here. But he's just getting a few little fish for lunch. Almost no Americans come to Cassis, the fishing port and playground of Marseille. The locals love a game of boule, which is highly competitive and often leads to quarrels which are quickly forgotten over a glass of pastis. It's a way of living. It's not just the food and the sunshine, of course that helps a lot. It's that you really slow down in Provence. There's a sort of spirit that gets into you that is Provençal, how else can I say it?
Well, if spending a lazy afternoon in an outdoor cafe of Provence is a bit too hedonistic for your taste, there are a lot more arduous adventures that can be had around here. Now, inspired by a recent article in Men's Journal magazine, where he is a contributing editor, Andy Mill recently came to this region and found that there are plenty of steep thrills in the Grand Canyon of France.
They call it France's Grand Canyon, the deepest canyon in Europe. The Gorge du Verdon winds majestically through some of the loveliest countryside in the south of France.
The French come here to climb the mountains, raft the rivers, swim, fish, and hike. But there are a couple of other adventures that are a little more challenging. Are you ready?
What fools we mortals be? Try telling that to the thousands of rock climbers who every year rappel down the canyon's mammoth walls, clinging only to a rope and a prayer.
Well, I'm 1,200 feet above the river, and in any language, it's absolutely spectacular. And for you, Chrissy, I'm hanging on tight.
Some climbers descend all the way down to the river, but taking the advice of my guides Michelle and Violette, I lowered myself about 100 feet, figuring I wouldn't push my luck.
Now you can put your hand if you want on the rocks.
Put my hand on the rocks.
Yes, it's fine.
Climbing back up was a challenge, But what a sweet victory when you finally reach the top.
Yahoo! Merci.
High above the hillside village of Moustier-Sainte-Marie, they practice what the locals call canyoning, rappelling down a series of waterfalls. It's been described as part rock climbing, part water sport, and I soon figured out why. While most people tend to climb the walls of the Gorge de Verdon or run the rapids below, there are those who prefer to soar above it. Because of the area's thermal drafts, the French Grand Canyon is a mecca for paragliders. Thanks to Philippe of the Aeroglisse Paragliding School, I was able to literally hitch a ride. The wind was particularly strong this day, which is both good and bad. Good because we could have soared for hours, bad because I was beginning to feel like I was on a flying roller coaster.
Yo, mama!
Soaring above this beautiful part of the world, I realized that what's even more impressive than daredevil climbs, descents, and flights is the magnificent Gorge de Verdon itself, Mother Nature's special gift to France.
You will see little metal plates like these all along the streets and walks of Aix-en-Provence. If you look close, they actually say Cézanne on them, and that is because this is kind of a road map of sorts. Lets you walk through the life of one of the most famous favorite sons of this area, Impressionist painter Paul Cézanne. And in fact, this area was a favorite haunt of many Impressionist artists of the 1800s. And Joel Siegel reports the reason why they came here, they liked what they saw.
The first thing that strikes you, it looks like a painting. The landscape, the color of the earth, the shutters against the stucco in the small Provence towns. It is the light, the artists say, so clean there's an edge to it, an edge so sharp it sometimes draws blood. Paul Cézanne didn't discover Provence, he was born here, in the ancient city called Aix.
Forget about your starving artists. This was built as a hunting lodge by Louis XIV's governor of Provence. Cézanne's father was a banker, and this was their weekend house.
His father let him build a studio on the top floor. He'd paint here for 50 years.
Van Gogh asked Cézanne, what about my paintings? And Cézanne answered, you are really painting like a crazy man.
And Cézanne was just this side of mad himself, a recluse, paranoid, obsessed. In Aix, it's easy to follow the Circuit Cézanne. He would walk miles to paint his landscapes. One morning, walking to his mountain, he collapsed in a diabetic coma.
His wife and son were in Paris. His maid sent a telegram, your husband is on his deathbed. But his wife had an appointment with a dressmaker. She hid the telegram from her son. She went to the dressmaker, and Paul Cézanne died alone.
From his grave, a view of Mont Saint-Victoire, Cézanne's mountain, he painted it 60 times. You can see the roots of Cubism and abstract expressionism. You can see why Picasso called Cézanne the father of us all. Picasso painted in Provence, but he never painted the mountain. It's been painted before, he said. Renoir lived here, and Drouin, and Dufy, and Matisse.
But more than the other artists of Provence, Vincent van Gogh painted where he was, and even now, there are places we can find. A cup of coffee at the Night Cafe in Arles. It's like walking into a Van Gogh.
In 444 days in Arles, Van Gogh made 200 paintings and 100 drawings, an explosion of genius. He lived above this cafe, and when the landlord nagged him for rent money, he joked, I'll make a painting, and when I'm a famous artist 100 years from now, the world will know what a dump this was. That's the landlord. We know. He moved to the Yellow House after a relative left a small inheritance. He lived on the second floor.
The house is gone. It was bombed during World War II. But this is where it was. Vincent's room was upstairs. His brother supported him, sent money through the mail. It was custom then to tip the postman. But Van Gogh was too poor to tip the postman. Instead, he painted his portrait. The postman, Monsieur Roulin, lived around the block. Another wonderful story, the reason Van Gogh painted the sunflowers, to decorate another room in the Yellow House, when Van Gogh found out his friend Gauguin was coming to visit.
December 23, 1888, Van Gogh and Gauguin had a terrible fight. No one knows why. That was the night Van Gogh cut off a piece of his ear and presented it to a local prostitute. They took him here, the courtyard at the hospital at Arles, and he painted. He spent 15 months in the asylum at nearby Saint-Remy. It is still a functioning hospital. The treatment is easy here, he wrote his brother. They do nothing. And Van Gogh painted this, here. He left Saint-Remy to be with his brother. 2 months later, he shot himself in a wheat field. His last words, "I wish I could die now." In Provence, it is the light, the artists say, so clear it has an edge so sharp, sometimes it draws blood.
What I have here is rather handy in this region of the world because many Americans like to explore Burgundy by bicycle. But our Steve Fox took a more expeditious means of going over the back roads of Burgundy.
Outside of the major cities and away from the highways, much of France is largely empty. In Burgundy, the countryside features farmhouses made of native stone, newly planted fields, and herds of livestock. Our first destination was the medieval town of Flavigny. The abbey here was constructed in the early 700s by Benedictine monks. 1,000 years later, they were forced to abandon the site after the French Revolution. Catherine Troubaud's grandfather bought the empty abbey in 1923 and continued a tradition begun by the ancient monks, making candy based around tiny anise seeds imported from Spain.
This is the anise seed. You can see? You can smell. You smell?
Let's see. Oh, yeah.
Very small
There's one of these little seeds in the middle of all the candy.
Yes.
The seeds are spun around in heated vats and sprayed with a sugar solution every 2 minutes, growing in size like a rolling snowball. Eventually, they're packaged and shipped all over the world, including the United States.
It was the oldest candy in France, and I'm very proud of that, and I want to go on, because people like that.
40 years ago, the old abbey yielded up some unexpected treasures to Catherine's grandfather. While digging in his garden one day, he discovered an ancient vaulted chapel that had been buried and forgotten for centuries.
When they find that, they are so happy.
Oh, I bet.
Oh, yeah. They make a lot of picture and just such like that. Wonderful.
Next up, the canals of Burgundy. Turns out there are about 5,000 miles of navigable canals and waterways in this country, 750 of them in Burgundy alone. They're all dug by hand, some of them as long as almost 4 centuries ago. Now, originally, these canals were used to transport goods to market, but not anymore. 20 years ago, trains and then trucks took over the cargo business, and the canals were all but abandoned. But then, in the mid-70s, the passenger barge business came to the rescue. The converted grain carriers are often luxuriously appointed. The largest can carry up to 50 people. The majority of travelers are Americans. The barges cruise sedately along at about the speed of a brisk walk, periodically descending through a series of locks built in the last century.
The effect of tourism on the canal is to A, save the canal, and B, bring a lot of tourists in very rural area where you wouldn't find any tourists otherwise.
At first glimpse, the Chateau de Sévigny looks more or less like any other 14th century Burgundy manor house surrounded by vineyards. Then you spot the 60 or so fighter jets in the backyard. Inside, the elegant old halls and towers are crammed with motorcycles. And of course, there are 22 Italian race cars in the barn. So do you think of yourselves as winemakers who just happen to like to have a lot of stuff around? Or are you collectors who happen to make wine?
No, we are first wine producer, and a lot of money have been using for collecting this plane and the race cars and the motorbikes.
The owner of the chateau, Michel Pont, used to race cars in France in the 1960s before he got serious about the wine business. Now his cellars produce about 250,000 bottles of wine a year, and he and his son collect things that go fast.
After race cars came motorbikes. To enjoy with motorbikes, he bought 1, 2, 3, then 10, 20, and now maybe 500 motorbikes.
Okay, so then we got 500 motorbikes. After motorbikes came...
Planes.
Ah, jet planes.
Jet planes, yeah.
Logically enough.
Logically. To continue the passion of mechanics.
And things that go fast, is that part of the passion, things that go fast?
Oui.
For years, experts from around the world have tried to explain what has become known as the French food paradox. I mean, how can all these French people eat all these rich, creamy sauces and fatty foods and drink wine with every meal and seemingly not exercise and yet still have a heart disease rate 40% less than Americans? I mean, I don't get it.
They're doing something right, aren't they? Is that Joan London behind those dark glasses? Yes,
oh,
indeed.
I took mine off.
I think it is. No, it does seem that the French have
It's very
found...
sunny here.
French have found a way to have their cake or their croissant and eat it too. And so Dr. Nancy Snyderman is here to talk about the French paradox. There's been a lot of research about this. Are there any answers, definitive?
Well, there are some definitive answers, and there's still a lot that we're trying to figure out. But if you look at the paradox and divide it into food and wine and lifestyle, the one thing that we do know about food is that the French may consume 37 to 38% of their calories from fat, but we low-fat, crazy Americans are only beating them about 2 percentage points. We still eat about 34, 35%. That's right.
34, 35% of our diet is fat?
Still fat, even with all the craze. And you know, you won't find low-fat, non-fat stuff in France. So there's only that 2% difference, which I think is extraordinary. But
with all
look
the creams,
at the
with all the
difference
sauces,
in the size of the plates.
I have
You
really
don't see
noticed
plates like
that.
this.
First of all, when you go through a buffet line, the plates are tiny. They're not like the big ones. And then the portions of food are much smaller.
That's right. I think the underlying word, at least for the food consumption, is moderation.
Go ahead and eat things, but they also do a lot of fresh cooking of, fresh foods, and they eat an awful lot of fresh fruit and vegetables.
You know, we talk about eating 4 to 5 servings a day. You can't walk into any one of these small towns and not see fabulous groceries and fabulous markets. And they eat a lot more of these. And we know that there are antioxidants and cholesterol-lowering components in wine, in fruits and vegetables. And so the whole thing sort of works together.
All right, you mentioned the fruits and vegetables, but you also mentioned the wine.
Right.
Because there is this theory that red wine,
That's right.
alcohol in moderation, but particularly in red wine, helps you in lowering your threat or risk of heart disease.
And it would be lovely to make a global statement about beer and scotch and gin, but we can't. What we're really concentrating on is the red wine. And it appears that in red wine there is a component that raises the good cholesterol, lowers the bad cholesterol, and decreases the stickiness of platelets, the blood component that contributes to heart disease and plaque, and that it probably plays a role. Now, it's not to say that people who have never
been drinking,
sipped a glass before should suddenly start, but a new study says 1 to 3 glasses a week for women. I was talking to Julia. She thinks that's nonsense, and we're probably talking like 1 to 3 glasses a day. So I think there's a lot we don't know. But I can tell you that at least the French eat their big meal in the middle of the day, then go to 4 to 5 hours without food. Yeah. They don't snack like we do. They get 8% of their calories, their fat calories from snacks. We get 25% of our fat calories from snacks.
But you do think that red wine in moderation, whether it's a couple of glasses a day or 4 or 5 glasses a week, is a good amount.
Absolutely. I think 1 to 3 glasses a day makes perfect sense. Eat your bigger meal in the middle of the day. Wait a minute.
Okay, well, Julia's going to come back.
That latest report is just a report.
That's right.
When you come to France, you must cook because the foods here are so marvelous. If you are going to partake in French cooking, you must have Julia Child because she is the expert at it. And if you are going to cook with Julia Child, you must cook one of her favorite French country dishes. And so you're going to make what, coq au vin?
Coq au vin, chicken and red wine.
And I must tell you, she has started out by making some bacon in this pot. Why?
That's because you render the bacon and then you saute the chicken in the bacon fat.
So you do it for 2 reasons, to get the bacon and also to get the fat to cook in which you cook the chicken.
And we've cooked it in we've cooked it in a frying pan so that we could take it out.
Transfer it in here.
Transfer it, and there's some to put this in. And now we have to flambe it. Because that it's fun to do, and it also gives it a nice little taste. I'll light it right.
Well, that's some cognac that you put in there?
You want to make sure that it's, you want to be sure that it's good and hot.
Ah, well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen, We need Julia and her torch here in order to make this happen, but I'll try it with the matches. There we go. Trust me, it's flambeing.
It is, it is. Let it flambe for a little bit, and that burns off most of the alcohol, but not all, and then douse it with red wine.
You're dousing, aren't you?
We want practically a bottle of red wine in there, because you're going to reduce the sauce, and then to give it a little strength. I've got a nice little brown chicken stock.
One of those?
You cover it up, and we're not going to put that in yet.
Okay.
You want to let it simmer until it's just about done, about 20, 25 minutes, and then...
20 to 25 minutes of simmering, and in that time, the red wine will reduce?
Somewhat, and then you're going to reduce it later.
Okay.
And then when it's almost done, we have a little browned onions there and a few little mushrooms.
You want to add, should we put those in?
No, we wait until it's almost done.
Well, we don't have 45 or 30, 25 minutes to let it simmer.
We have them already made.
Oh, you do? Oh,
we
okay.
do, right here.
Crafty people, these.
And look at that. That's a beautiful dark sauce. And you know, they use our chef here uses a thickening of chicken blood.
Chicken blood?
Don't say ugh.
You thicken with chicken blood?
No.
Now that's very much in the French country style of cooking.
It is. And I think a lot of people who don't know farming
yes,
think that chicken comes in a package.
Well,
which of course it doesn't.
Everybody's having their breakfast, so I don't want to get too graphic about this, but the chicken blood would come because the chicken would actually be slaughtered on the farm. Is that right?
Exactly.
Here, you sit down for a second, because I want to hear more about this.
And then we have some nice...
So the chicken is killed before it's cooked, and then the blood is preserved and used as a thickening agent in this.
And you could also mash up the liver with it, too. And it just has a wonderful taste.
Did we use the chicken blood in this completed one, or was this
Well, the chef made this one, and he put the chicken blood in it.
He did?
No.
Okay.
Because they have it, because we're in farming country here.
Oh, this looks tender.
And that really dark color is a very good one for the sauce. It's a rich tasting dish.
I noticed you saved a little wine as much as you poured in the pot. You saved a little wine as well.
And this is the good stuff. This is Clos de Vougeot. I think it's 89. This will do it for you.
The chicken is marvelously moist, Julia.
It is. It's not overcooked.
No, not in the least. And that's a relatively simple dish to do.
It is very simple.
And mighty tasty.
Full of the glory of Burgundy.
All right. We toast you again. Behind me, the Eiffel Tower, one of the most recognizable structures in the world, and just one of the sights of Paris that caught the eye of our Steve Fox. Steve, as you know, reports on the little stories of various regions that you might miss when you travel. And this morning, on our last day of our passport to Europe, Steve wanted to show you the highs and the lows of Paris.
It happens every 7 years, starting 1,000 feet above the city of Paris. 25 men ascend to the top of the Eiffel Tower, attach themselves to safety lines, and begin to repaint one of the world's most recognizable monuments, all by hand. The job won't be finished until next year. Amazingly, no painter has ever been killed or even seriously hurt on the job.
I think about the danger, and sometimes I look down at Paris. But I've been painting for 5 years, and mostly I think about my work. A job is a job.
The century-old monument is always painted a specific color known as Eiffel Tower brown, sort of a dark cinnamon.
This color was in good harmony with the middle sky of Paris for each season, you see?
And now, from high above Paris, we go to the mirror image of the city just beneath the surface.
Welcome to the sewers of Paris. There are 1,300 miles of them in all, making it the largest sewer system in the world. Beneath every street and alley in the city, there's a sewer. They share the same name, below and above ground. And every building in the city is connected to the system with a pipe, so that in Paris, it is at least theoretically possible for you to visit your own personal sewer connection.
Over the years, the sewers have become a tourist attraction, drawing 100,000 visitors annually. The sewers were built to remedy the terrible sanitary conditions that caused a series of catastrophic plagues in the early 19th century. Since then, the method by which they are flushed clean twice a day has not changed all that much. How are these different sized balls used to push stuff out of the system? How does it work?
Alors, le système est gravitaire.
The balls are 9/10 the size of the sewer tube. Therefore, they rise to the top of the tube, and with the gravity, the dirt and silt is pushed down underneath the ball and flushed out of the system.
While a sewer system might seem to be an unlikely tourist attraction, how about a burial ground? Père Lachaise is the biggest cemetery in Paris. 1 million people are buried here. The same number visit every year. They come to mourn the dead, of course, but also to see the graves of the famous, giants of literature and the world of music. The biggest attraction, which draws 100,000 tourists a year, is the simple grave of rock star Jim Morrison, who died in Paris of a drug overdose in 1971. You came all the way from Melbourne, Australia, to Paris, and you're in a cemetery?
I know it's a bit sad, but I'm a Doors fan, and I've seen the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, so...
So Jim Morrison seemed the logical next step?
Well, he's a bit of a legend.
Yeah?
You go and you see the grave, and it's sort of your personal encounter with Jim Morrison. You know, you've grown up with his music, and you show up, and there he is. And it's sort of, I don't know, touching for people.
Just as Jim Morrison lives on in the minds of his fans through his work, so also in a way does the great artist Claude Monet. In the Normandy countryside west of Paris lies Giverny, the village where Monet had his home and garden and worked for almost half a century until his death in 1923. It has been said that to understand Monet's genius, you must visit this place, which was as much his creation as any of his paintings.
His life was gardening and painting, and sometimes gardening was almost most important than painting for his own pleasure. His color schemes are all over, but you can get to know Monet just by looking at his gardens, at the house, his relationship to color.
After his death, Monet's home and garden fell into disrepair and ruin. They were brought back to life thanks to $14 million in donations from American benefactors and are sustained by the proceeds from 450,000 paying visitors a year. Monet's art is timeless, and now his garden will live on as well.
Everywhere you look around here, there's something of historical significance. Behind me, the Musée d'Orsay, which used to be a major railroad station here. 1986, 47 years after the last train pulled out, it was converted into a museum, which now contains some of the finest Impressionist paintings anywhere in the world. In fact, this picks up where the Louvre leaves off. And just where might that be? Well, Good Morning America Sunday co-host Antonio Mora has some answers.
Some have called the centuries-old Louvre Palace and Museum the eighth wonder of the world. The Mona Lisa calls it home, as do the Winged Victory, the Venus de Milo, and many more of the world's most precious works of art.
Despite its artistic treasures and great beauty, by the early 1980s, critics were complaining that the Louvre had begun to resemble a dark and gloomy medieval prison. They said that it was almost hostile to visitors and that its glory as the world's greatest museum had faded. The French government then decided enough was enough and launched a massive facelift.
The courtyard of the Louvre disappeared as construction began on the first stage of what was called French President François Mitterrand's Grand Projet, Grand Project. Its result, the stunning glass pyramid designed by Chinese-American architect I.M. Pei. Last year, more than 6 million visitors passed through the pyramid. Many of them were inspired by the museum's newest wing in a building named for King Louis XIII's powerful advisor, the Cardinal Richelieu.
He was, of course, himself a very intelligent man, a great collector. And when he died, just some months before the king, before Louis XIII, he gave to the king his collections.
The Richelieu Wing's collection includes a hall full of Rembrandts and a spectacular gallery that displays all 24 canvases of Rubens' Medici series. Those who love sculpture can head for the Richelieu Wing's 3 covered courtyards. Natural light pours in through their glass ceilings.
One of the most wonderful things that I've seen here in the museum is that you've used daylight so beautifully, not only in the courtyards.
Everywhere.
Could you tell me a little bit about these sculptures?
7th century before the Christ, Middle East, of course, coming from the palace of Khorsabad, one of the great civilizations of the past, one of the founding civilizations.
That was in Assyria?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Other jewels in the Richelieu wing's crown are the Napoleon III apartments. Their grand scale and mid-19th century ornateness are dazzling.
There are very few examples remaining of the style of Napoleon III. Most of these great arrangements of the time have been destroyed. By chance, the one of the Louvre has been kept.
You have dedicated most of your life to this museum. What is your hope for the future?
I would like to have people coming back to the museum. It's impossible, of course, to see the museum in one visit, that's quite clear. And we hope to make the museum sufficiently attractive in a city so noisy as Paris, so active as Paris, to have a place to rest and to enjoy. This, I think, would be my dream as the director of the museum.
Parisians are undeniably in love with their poodles. They are powdered, they are pampered, they are paraded all around the city. In fact, about the only place you won't find one is right here in the Tuileries Gardens. The groundskeepers kind of outweigh the Parisian love affair with the curly-coated canine. But as Chantal reports, just about everywhere else in the city, poodles prevail.
You ain't nothing but a hound dog, you're crying all the time.
Americans have a long-standing passion for poodles, with everything from poodle skirts to poodle haircuts to, yes, that's right, punk rock poodles. In Poland, poodle postage was the rage a while back. Even the most quintessential Englishman of our century, Winston Churchill, made no bones about which breed of canine was tops on his list.
But nowhere else on earth is the poodle more revered than here in France. On the streets, in the museums, in the little cafes, in the big stores, you'll find, dare I say it, oodles of poodles.
They were elegant, you see. You see a dog like that, a poodle looks like a prince, you see. He's the prince of the dog.
Actually, it wasn't until the 16th and 17th centuries that poodles became a part of the French canine aristocracy. For centuries, poodles, like most other dogs, were put to work around the farm, herding sheep and cattle. And believe it or not, haircuts like these were designed to take the weight off their back ends so they could run faster. Eventually, French poodles, often called miniature lions in French, moved from the fields to the foyers, becoming the most delicate and domestic of French breeds.
C'est ma petite poutre jolie. Oh, oui,
So just how much do the Parisians pamper their poodles? Welcome to Cabot de Vincennes, one of Paris's most exclusive poodle salons. On any given day, some 10 to 15 four-legged customers prance in for their $100 to $200 makeover. Washing, clipping, blow-drying, manicuring, and, of course, accessorizing. Shop owner Sarah Sedbon is so good at clipping poodles, clients come here from as far away as Portugal, England, and the U.S. to have their prized poodles primped.
You know what's amazing about this dog seems to actually love being groomed. A lot of American dogs don't like it at all.
I think we spoil a lot our dogs, and they sleep in the bed, they go everywhere in the house, then by that they need to have clean dog.
Of course, because they're in restaurants, they're in stores.
Yes, they are everywhere. You go to the hotel, you go to taxi, you can take the dog everywhere. Then it's necessary that the dog is clean.
You can take dogs in taxis here?
Anywhere. This dog was doing a TV in France for taxi. We were trying to take some taxi, and it was very easy with a poodle, but with a golden retriever it was not possible.
You're saying my dog wouldn't get the cab and this dog would? That's great. You'd get the cab. You should live in New York.
Monique Parisot is such a lover of poodles that she has 5 of them. And for her, that's not enough.
Well, it's nice when you see them pretty, and they like to be pretty. You know, Duchesse, it's a kind of dog who really loves that you look at her. She loves to be clean. She loves that every day you do the head, you do the hair. She loves that. And then she's happy.
So the next time you have a hard time getting your poodle to mind you, you might want to tap into his French sensibilities by simply speaking French to him. Now watch this. Assieds-toi, Fifi. Fifi, assieds-toi. Assieds-toi. Okay, so my accent needs a little work.
Accommodations provided by Holiday Inn Worldwide, offering a special summer promotion, Europe for Less, at over 140 hotels throughout Europe. You can see Europe for Less with Holiday Inn. Train transportation provided by Eurail from city center to city center and the European countryside in between. A Eurail pass is the smart, comfortable, easy way to experience the sights of Europe. Eurail.